Feliz jueves, happy Thursday, everyone, y bienvenidos. Welcome to our Careers in the Outdoors panel discussion. My name is Brenda, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, ella, and I'm so excited to be moderating today's panel discussion. As you all know, we've been celebrating Semillitas Outdoors all week with fun outings and virtual events that really center you, our Latinx youth, and your families' experience in the outdoors. So we really hope that with this panel, you will be inspired by our panelists' stories to explore and pursue careers in the outdoors and conservation. But before we get going, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm currently coming to you from unceded ancestral land of the Payot-Cowichum, Tongva, Cahuilla, and Keech peoples, otherwise known as Riverside, California. And we'd love to know where you're all coming in from. So if you could let us know in the comments section, that would be amazing. And while you do that, I'll go ahead and bring our panelists into the space. I'd like to welcome Michelle Neuenschwander, Ricardo Escobar, and Christian Cortez. Hello, everyone. Welcome. And thank you all so much for being here.
Hi. Thank you for having us.
Good morning, everyone.
My pleasure. So I'd love to start with you all sharing a little bit about yourselves in the best way that you see fit. So if we can start with you, Michelle, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Brenda. So my name is Michelle Neuenschwander. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I'm currently on the native lands of the Powhatan people, also known as Richmond, Virginia, but I reside on the native lands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho people, also known as Denver. Although my last name may confuse you or may have you think I'm German, I identify as a Latina or a Bolivian American, a daughter of immigrants, and a first-generation college graduate. I also, in terms of my job, I connect Latinos and people of color with really cool internship opportunities with the federal government.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Christian.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. My name is Christian Cortez. My pronouns are he, him, it. I am a second-generation Mexican-American, and I am a wildlife biologist and currently a graduate student at Cal Poly Humboldt, formerly known as Humboldt State University. Excuse me. Where I am at right now is on the native lands of the Wapo people. And in their language, they call this land Tallahalusi, which means beautiful land. This is actually something that I recently learned from my advisor, Dr. Matt Johnson. But we may recognize this land now more commonly as Napa Valley. And a cool thing that I'm doing here in Napa Valley is actually my thesis project, which will investigate the health of barn owl chicks, or nestlings as we call them, and see how their health connects to the land around where they are residing in. And that's what my project will be covering.
Very cool. Ricardo.
Hello, buenos días todos. My name is Ricardo. I'm from Los Angeles. Tengo familia from Guatemala y Mexico. And I'm actually on the road right now in Salt Lake City. And I don't know what the ancestral folks tied to this land are. So I don't have that information on hand. But I'm headed back to Estes Park, Colorado, because I work at Rocky Mountain National Park, the ancestral lands of the Ute and the Arapaho people. And as a park ranger with the National Park Service, I, for the most part, work with volunteers and supervising other employees. But another effort that I really like to do is connecting underrepresented communities with public land spaces.
Great. Thank you all so much for those introductions. You all do such fascinating work. And I'd like to start our first question with, as teenagers, which family and or community activities did you enjoy? And how did this joy inspire you to pursue a career in the outdoors? And we can start with Christian. I'll go ahead and start with you.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Southern California, specifically Anaheim. And as a teenager, there were many family activities that I enjoyed doing. For an example, one activity is on the weekend, sometimes we would go to our local park and we would play soccer or basketball with my uncles. Another activity on special occasions is we would have a carne asada in our backyard. We'd invite La Familia over and just have a great cookout, good food, always fun. But the truth is, for me, as a teenager, in my experience, it wasn't these activities that inspired me to pursue a career in the outdoors, not because that they weren't fun, but because at the time, it wasn't even a possibility for me. Like, it didn't even cross my mind that this was even an option on the table for my future. And I think it's a much more common thing in underrepresented communities, especially in the Latinx community. You know, growing up with first generation immigrant parents who every day they work hard and they want the best for their son. They think about the career options for their kids. And so they're thinking, oh, my son is going to be a doctor, my son is going to be an abogado, a lawyer, or an engineer. And it's like the big three really that come across, but I didn't really get to discover these careers in the outdoors until later in my undergrad studies. But I will say this, I have a silver lining in my past in which one of these family activities was more of a chore because I grew up with pet birds. And one of my activities was spending time with them, cleaning after them, feeding them. And I didn't know until later on that this was something that would inspire the career that I choose now today. And why I'm here speaking to so many of you now that have gone through the same.
That's such a beautiful story. And I'll have follow-up questions for you after this. But Ricardo, do you want to go next?
Sure. I was lucky that with my parents, they took my siblings and I to national parks. I also grew up in Southern California, so we'd go to places like Sequoia, Kings Canyon, Yosemite, all that good stuff. So I was exposed to it early on and always knew that I would continue to be involved in those kind of activities. But I don't think I made that connection in terms of a career path until an undergraduate. I took an introductory geology course. And from that was when I realized, like, well, wow, like I'm learning about things that I've been exposed to every time we go on these road trips to visit these national parks. I can study this for fun. Sweet, let's do it. So I, got that degree and then went on to grad school, and I thought I wanted to be a teacher. And then I remembered that, oh no, I really like being outside because that's what I got to do for my research, right? Was go outside and ascend these volcanoes and collect rock samples. And so I tried applying to many positions through USA Jobs, which is how most people get federal positions in conservation, at least with like the National Park Service. And I was really just really let down with how arduous and non-intuitive the whole process was. And so what finally gave me that opportunity to get my foot in the door was a Mosaics and Science internship program, which is a diversity internship program. And thankfully, through that program, I got essentially a non-competitive path to get hired. So I didn't have to go through the typical process of USA Jobs and building a federal resume. So internship programs like Latino Heritage, Mosaics in Science are a good way to start that process of getting your foot in the door for a
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because that is one of the questions that although it wasn't within our framework, I do want to bring up again, because I know that you are all at different organizations or educational institutions where you have internships that might be of use to all of our youth out there, and for parents or educators who are tuning in as well, might be a great resource. So we'll circle back to that towards the end. Thank you so much. Michelle, I'd love to hear from you.
Yes. So as a younger teen, I wasn't really exposed to national parks. That kind of came later. I think my mom would always, I took her camping once recently, and she was like, yeah, this is fun, but I spent my whole life trying not to sleep on the floor. So for me, camping wasn't something that came until later. But as a younger teen, I noticed I did like to walk in the woods and pretend to get lost, but I wouldn't really it was really exciting for me, especially if there were a lot of trees around. It was just really fun. I always just loved being outside in general. My family enjoyed playing soccer and volleyball and basketball, and I learned those sports from them. And so I would often play them outside. And luckily, there was a park that was 2 blocks away from our house, which I now realize is such a privilege. And I would spend hours at the park. I'd go after school with friends and come home when it was getting dark. And at the time, I didn't realize that I was being called to the outdoors. It wasn't until I was a young adult and noticed that being outside was really important for me. I didn't originally plan to pursue a career aligned with the outdoors. It kind of organically happened, actually. I was really interested in public health, which wasn't a well-known field or career before COVID. And answering their helpline, the cancer education program, and trying to educate the Latino community about cancer. So I was working on that, but then a couple years later, we did start a partnership with the National Park Service. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Ricardo, because we do the same type of work as Mosaics in Science. In that first year, we hired 15 Latino college students to be interns to work at these really cool national parks, in hopes of also better connecting with the Latino community. And since then, our program has expanded, and now we hire up to 200 interns a year to work at national parks, national wildlife refuges, forests, and other public lands. So it kind of, my field going into the outdoors wasn't really planned out from the beginning. Hopefully
Yeah,
you
I
can
think
hear
in
me.
many
I know
ways.
I froze in a couple times.
Yeah, we can hear you now. You're back. Thank you. Yeah, I think in many ways, a lot of your trajectories weren't very linear, right? So that's something that I'd like to come back to. But I also want to know, as you thought about life after high school, or having a career in the outdoors, what types of questions came up for you, and who were there for you, like parents, counselors, educators, mentors, that really helped you explore these questions? And Ricardo, we can start with you.
Well, I know that we probably have audience from that age group, middle school, high school. I was probably not the model high school student. I did the bare minimum to get by, and the only reason why I went on to college right after is because my mom went to college, right, and she had her career as an educator in LA, and so she was adamant about my siblings and I continuing on, but I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. Well, actually, I take that back. I had my dreams, and sometimes still have my dreams of just being a musician, right? That's actually what I started off as. Wanted to be a rock star, I guess. But I would say that I think it was my undergraduate advisor that started to have a career somewhat focused more in the outdoors. And this was my undergraduate advisor for the geology program, because she actually took us as students on this spring field trip to explore national parks of the Southwest, like Grand Canyon, Zion, Bryce Canyon. And so it was finally with that trip, right under her guidance, that I realized, wow, like this is actually a possibility. So it came a little bit later, and that was, once I was a sophomore in college. So right out of high school, first year in college, none of that really. It was just wanting to be a musician, right? But I think that's kind of the beauty, right, about going to college right after high school, is that you're able to take courses that interest you. You know, there are some general requirements, but for the most part, you kind of have freedom of choice. And so I think, you know, through these different courses, you learn things and you start getting curious about other kinds of topics that maybe you typically weren't, and that could spark that interest in a career in the outdoors.
Great, thank you so much. Michelle.
Yeah, so similar to Ricardo, I don't think I was the best student per se, and it was scary to think about what to do after high school. I had some friends that would talk about going away for college, others were unsure about what they were doing yet. And for whatever reason at that time, I didn't think I was smart enough to go to college or to graduate from college. But my mother really hoped that I would go to college since my sister did. So at the time, questions that came up for me were, you know, how will I afford college? How much is it? How do you even get loans? How do you submit a FAFSA? What, you know, how do you get student financial aid? Do I need to prepare for the SAT? How much is the SAT? Like these like questions that you think everyone knows, but at the time I didn't know how to answer any of those questions. And I also had no idea what I wanted to do or study in college. And so I felt like others already figured out like, oh, I want to be a vet or I want to be a doctor. And I didn't really know the types of fields that were out there for me. You know, I didn't really know what an engineer did. Like, you know, I had an idea of it, but I didn't really know. And to be honest, I didn't even know about outdoor and recreation types of jobs at the time. Since my parents were immigrants to the US and cleaned houses or worked in catering, they didn't really know how to advise me about college or the types of jobs out there. And my parents would say, you know, I could study business or be a doctor, a lawyer, similarly, Ricardo, because people think those jobs are prestigious and, you know, they make a lot of money, which is, you know, why wouldn't an immigrant parent want their child to make a lot of money? But the thing is, if that's not something that's aligned with what you want, it might not be the best path for you. And I would say the only one person that I could definitely think of that helped me explore some of those questions was my older sister, Liz, who transferred to an out-of-state college after going to community college. I could also think of a parent liaison at my high school that was supporting Spanish-speaking families. She really helped me and my mom better understand the college application process and was really helpful in answering some of those questions at the time.
Great, thank you so much. Christian.
Yeah, I connect with Michelle and Ricardo in so many ways of the struggle of making that transition from high school to college and trying to discover what I want to do with my life. On top of like, what's an SAT and like how much does it cost to get into college? These are real questions that need to be asked. And growing up with parents that, you know, don't have that college education, and it was a very difficult journey for me to get to this point, because they had to learn, but I was also learning at the same time. So it was really a struggle. But to add to these questions, I would have to say one of the questions that I was faced with growing up out of high school, and I think this is a common question with a lot of people, and sometimes maybe even forced upon, is who do I want to be? And not just that, but how do I become the person that I want to be, right? And so I didn't really have that much guidance after high school. I just had the education that I, you know, from the courses that I took in high school and trying to think about how can I apply myself, right? So in my undergrad, I went into Cal State University at Fullerton, and I signed up as a computer science major. But 2 weeks before that, I was thinking, well, doctors make a lot of money, so I'm going to try to go for biological science, right? And so I switched that up, and I was a pre-med for most of the time. And later in my studies in undergrad, I realized that, you know, this just really isn't for me. It's really interesting topics, and I learned a lot, but I don't know if I really have this connection to what I'm studying right now. And I remember this specific moment where my physiology professor had someone come in as an alumni, and he talked about his experience of going through med school, what you have to do, the kind of people that they accept, and all that stuff. And it was informative, but there was this one point that he talked about, is that he took some time to really explore for himself in his life what he wanted to do. And part of that was he did some work in the Amazons with exotic birds and parrots. And I was like, wow, that's a thing? Like, I could do that? And that like really ignited this curiosity for the careers in the outdoors. The next semester, I signed up for ornithology with the professor of Dr. Bill Hosey. Quick shout out for him. Thank you so much. Because he was really the guiding light to just showing me these different career paths in the outdoors and what you can do. And there's just so much that we can learn from just like these different paths. And it really was like the pivotal point in my career path that just like really changed everything, because taking ornithology, the study of birds, really connected with my past growing up with pet birds, and it just all meshed together, and I've been pursuing it ever since.
All of your stories resonate so much with me. Similar to you, Michelle, my mom cleans houses for a living, and my dad is a line cook. And, I'm first to graduate high school, first to graduate college. And it's really overwhelming to navigate the system by yourself, and for your parents who don't know what the American school system is like, right? But similar to you, Ricardo, my dream was to be a music performance major, and and that was my first major in college. Now, having my parents accept that was a whole ordeal within itself. But back to this, importance of knowing about the FAFSA, about the SAT or ACT costs, all of those things. I remember losing a scholarship because I didn't have the FAFSA on file. And that was a very like rude awakening for me and my parents. And I remember getting in trouble because my parents really relied on me to know all the information. So thank you for sharing those stories, because I think that so many of your youth out there may be also grappling with that. So thank you. And I'd love to, Christian, did you have something that you wanted to add?
No.
Okay. So the other question I had for you all is, what type of training and or education did you receive for your career in the outdoors? And do you think that any of the middle school or high school subjects that you probably hated or cringed at, actually you really do use in your career? And I'll start with Christian on this one.
Yeah. As far as the high school education goes, I think in my career path, definitely biology was there, and it really takes up the majority of what I do nowadays. But I do have to say, there is also a little bit of math in there. So if you don't like math, I just a fair warning, because if you're going into more of like a professor institutional type of career, you have to take into like stats into consideration as an example. But as far as the education and training that I've undergone, I'd like to go back to my ornithology class at Cal State Fullerton. I said that this was really a pivotal point in my career path. And this class was really amazing for me, because it connected this innate curiosity and wonder for birds, and how they thrive upon like different habitats and ecosystems. But what was really cool about this class was that it wasn't just about like the textbook aspects of like the anatomy of birds or the evolution. Like, it wasn't just like being in a classroom and just like looking through the textbook. This class was unique for me because part of our curriculum was trying to discover how to apply for these kinds of jobs and how to look for these kinds of jobs. We actually had a class activity where we had to go through different job boards and actually build a resume for these kinds of jobs. And we were graded on this too. We had to go to our career center at our campus and sort of like ask these questions about, like, you know, when it comes to an interview, like what kind of questions there are, what should I put on my resume, what should I highlight? These are really important things, because making the transition from for a student from the education pool to the career pool, it can be very tough if you don't know how to make that transition. And so to put these real life things into practice, I think I value that so much, and I feel like that's needed in so many aspects of not just in biology or careers in outdoors, but in pretty much any career path or field. And another thing, even beyond that, what was really cool, and I think was the favorite thing about so many classes, are field trips, right? So in our ornithology class, we took trips to our local wildlife refuge so we can have more practice with our birding ID, but we also visited several entities within our local area. For example, one of them being the Star Ranch Audubon Sanctuary in Trebico Canyon. So we got to see how they process and ban birds for their study. But we also got to see the International Bird Rescue Center in San Pedro, which is a wildlife rehabilitation center that focuses on many seabirds that are they're sick, or they just don't have that much food. So they bring them in, they rehabilitate them, and then they release them back into the wild. To see these people at work and to hear their story, their experiences, really connected with me. And I actually volunteered at both of these places after my college education, and what really propelled me in my career in the future. And so I'm really grateful for this class and my professor for just really helping me out in that way.
That's amazing. It's so important to, when you're a first generation college student, you're also going to be a first generation professional. And I find that there's so much work that needs to be done in that sector. Ricardo, I'm going to go on to you, because I know that you've also done, Ricardo, a PowerPoint on how to get federal careers, and kind of just sharing your experience with college students or youth. So I'm going to hand it over to you, because I know that you've also done some of that.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Brenda. You know, I was trying to think back to like high school, right? If there was any kind of training or education, and I can't think of anything specifically, unfortunately, right? Which is, I mean, maybe that's because I went to public school. I mean, and not to bash on public, I'm all public schools, right? But limited resources, especially in you know, big public school districts like LAUSD. And so I think the training and education started with my parents, right? Like making us aware of what national parks are, taking us to these places so we can learn about it. So really, I feel like I owe it to my folks for beginning that training and education. They taught me how to camp, they taught me how to hike, they taught me camping reservations, right? Everything, like all logistics related. So it started with them. And then in terms of like, I guess, you know, formal academic training, it didn't start until college. When I declared my major as geology, I was lucky that my academic advisor really, I guess, saw something in me, you know, I guess a lot of opportunity. And so early on, she invited me to be part of a research expedition to Ecuador, which is where I first got my experience in what it's like doing work in the outdoors, right? And conducting research in a foreign country. And it was also my first backpacking experience too. So a lot of it started with my undergraduate experience. And then kind of like what Christian was saying, the field trips, right? And I know that's also true of community colleges. So I was fortunate enough that I was able to go to a 4-year institution right off the bat. I went to Cal State LA, so shout out to Cal State LA. But, you know, I think it's really important that even if a 4-year institution isn't a choice right away after high school, at the very least, a community college is a good place to start. I have lots of friends who are now educators at community colleges in SoCal. and they make it a point, right, to have these meaningful field trips, mostly in the field of geosciences, right? But just exposing people, because I remember in my geology courses, for I'd say 90% of the people in attendance in these classes, this is the first time they were stepping foot in a national park, first time they were camping, first hiking, right? So that training for some folks doesn't start until, your early 20s. I was witness to that, right? And in terms of like the career path, which you asked, Brenda, I didn't have any of that. And I think that's why when I first started applying to federal positions right after grad school, I had absolutely zero luck. I must have put in applications for 50 to 60 openings. I was never referred. And my mistakes, two things. One was I didn't know what a federal resume was. I wasn't compiling a federal resume, which is absolutely required. And then the second part was, for every job posting, there is a questionnaire associated with it. And how you answer that questionnaire, you have to be very strategic about it. And there's no room for modesty in that. I didn't know that. And I didn't receive any of that until I was a Mosaics and Science intern. So Environment for the Americas, which is a nonprofit based out of Colorado, they manage the Mosaics and Science program, as well as Latino Heritage internships. And they put on amazing webinars and workshops that teach those interns how to build a federal resume, how to navigate USA jobs, how to network. Because I feel like networking is sometimes equally as important, if not more. So that's kind of been my training.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that and highlighting really the importance also of not only networking, but also the community college system, especially in California. I work at the California Community College System, and I'm director of a TRIO program, but there's also math, engineering, science, achievement programs, MESA, that are specifically for underrepresented students. And I think like just tapping into those resources when you go to the 2-year community college system is so important to really get that, circle of support behind you and to really kind of open the doors for networking as well. So thank you so much for highlighting that. Michelle, love to hear from you.
Yeah, so in terms of education, so I received my bachelor's degree, and it did take me an extra year to graduate because, similar to Christian, I changed my major several times, not knowing what I wanted to do. And I didn't study like environmental science or natural resources or any of the sciences at the time, which can be common to go into these types of careers. Like I mentioned, I studied public health, but that goes to show, sometimes you shift, you'll study something and you'll shift and go a different route later on. Which for me at the time, I was like, I just want to figure out my major and finish as fast as I can and just like know my plan right away. But it didn't happen that way. And I would say in terms of when I think about middle school or high school, and I think about my job currently, because my job is a little different. Like I'm not out in the field per se, like at a cool national park. I'm more like in an office space. I do get to visit some cool national parks when we visit our interns and get to know our partners, which is really amazing and honestly has changed my life. It's why I moved to Denver. But I would say some of the things that I do in work currently in my role is a lot of presentations. So kind of like this. And oh man, did I get nervous in high school when I had to present in front of a class. But this is actually my like third kind of presentation or panel today, and I still get nervous every time. And I think I've learned to push forward and kind of be prepared and authentic in what I have to say. So presentations, like it's not a class, but it is something you do in high school, and you're kind of like slowly practicing. Something else that I think about is time management. I know that's something that a lot of people say, but I think about school, right? And you're better at some classes, you're not better at other classes. And if you want to do well in the class you're not doing well in, you need to add more time to study and prioritize your time to focus more on that class, or the focus more on the class you're really struggling in. So I think that's something else that I think about when I think about middle school or high school and things that I learned. I would say one more thing that I didn't realize was going to be a big part of my life and I wish ended in high school was writing papers. So I can't say that I write papers all the time, but in high school, I remember I hated writing papers. I just felt like it was hard for me to put words on paper. I didn't feel like I was articulate enough, to make my papers really interesting. And, putting in the time and work to complete a big assignment is literally you practicing to later enter the workforce. Currently, I have to write reports, I have to write emails, I have to really convey my message, whether in writing or talking. So I feel like writing papers, weirdly enough, also helps me practice for writing what I have to write today, and meeting some of those deadlines. So kind of like when you're studying for a test and meeting a deadline, I still have to meet deadlines at work all the time. And I think something else kind of similar to what Christian and Ricardo said, when I think about like, how did I get connected with the outdoors? I think one important thing is really looking out for those organizations that are supporting people of color or Latinos. I think about like in college, I joined the Hispanic Student Association, and I met so many amazing people there that are studying different things, some in the outdoors, some in other industries. And then I even think about when I moved to Colorado, I didn't know anybody. And it was so nice to connect with people from Latino Outdoors, because I love the mission of just like, you know, feeling safe to go to an event, even though you don't know anybody, but you know, it'll be fun. So being able to create that space is so important, and actually putting yourself out there, even though it feels uncomfortable, maybe going to an event alone, has really helped me become who I am. So it's really looking for those opportunities and resources and organizations that support you.
Amazing. You know, it kind of comes back to what Christian had shared earlier, and Ruby made a comment about this, about, you know, having that question of who am I and who do I want to be? And I think that oftentimes we go to college or transition from high school to college or community college or university, and we have this set, you know, vision of what we want to do, but then we change our major like 3 or 4 times. I know for me it was 4 times. And I think that we oftentimes don't give ourselves enough space to know that we are going to grow and change in different ways that we can't even imagine perhaps right now, right? And to really give yourself that permission is really important, I think. So I have my last question for you is, we all know how tough it can be to transition from middle school to high school. How did you all handle the emotions that come with making big life decisions when you're a teenager? Whether that be, you know, even making the decision to go to college or moving away to college. So I think I'll start with you, Michelle.
Sure, thanks, Brenda. So moving to another new place is a big and sometimes scary decision that may actually happen multiple times in your life, even after moving away for college, if that's what you decide to do. I moved away to go to college at VCU at first. I went there for a semester, and then I realized staying in the dorms and having a meal plan was getting really expensive. And the reason why I went to VCU is because I didn't want to go to my neighboring university that was like down the street, George Mason. But I ended up transferring back to George Mason. So I ended up commuting. So I wasn't away at college anymore. And I think, you know, that's part of the Latino culture, right? Like for us, Latino culture may include staying close to your family and staying in the same house or the same neighborhood or the area. We may be multi-generational in one house at a time, which I think is so beautiful. But leaving that comfort to go live on your own or to live with a roommate that you've never met is really scary. And I think knowing that some of those scary things in life happen because you grow out of them. You know, again, I thought that semester I moved away to college was the only time I was going to move away, but I ended up moving away to an entire new state just about 4 years ago. And I left my parents, my tias, my tios, mis primas, nephews, nieces, everyone all resides in Northern Virginia. And I definitely, you know, miss that, but I feel like I've grown so much more, even having to be away from my family. And I've also like developed closer relationship with family members, and learning how to connect from afar. So I think it's really scary, but sometimes I feel like you really need to step out of your comfort zone, that comfort zone, whether it's your neighborhood or your house or being your family, to grow, because you need to make room to grow and learn new things. So I feel like that's how I transitioned, but it is a very scary time. And even now, Ricardo, I'm so glad you shared about the internship program that you're a part of, because currently with the MANO project, we hire hundreds of interns, and we talk to interns, we get to know them, and they themselves, they graduated college, are also really scared to move away to, work at a national park in this really rural area across the country, because they're so used to being around their family. And that's okay. I think, we all may feel that at some point in our lives. And it's not just going to happen maybe right after high school or right after college. It'll continue to happen at some point later in your life. And so it's kind of like realizing that it's important to step out of your comfort zone and do some of those things that scare you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Christian. Oh, you're muted, Christian.
Thank you so much. What Michelle has said, I think, really connects with me as well. Just going back to applying for different colleges and UCs, to be exact, was an exciting time for me because I had this dream of trying to plan out my life. It's like, oh, I'm going to a new college, I'm going to be in a new place, going to meet new people. But at the same time, it was also stressful because this was a completely new learning experience, not just for myself, but for my parents. And that was really stressful to like send out all the applications and go through the process. But what really hit for me was rejection letters, right? And I can say one fond memory for myself was my dream school at the time was UC Irvine, UCI. And I had this idea that I would be dorming there and I'd have like this new experience for myself. And I remember getting the rejection letter on my birthday. And for myself, I was like, wow, thanks. Just a wonderful birthday gift. But in hindsight, it's actually kind of nice that I got that letter because I wouldn't have ended up in a school that was so near to my home, Cal State Fullerton, and I wouldn't have taken ornithology. I wouldn't have learned so much about like careers in the outdoors, and I wouldn't be speaking to everybody here today. So it's like this weird flashback perspective. So that was one of the things that I really had to struggle with, is the idea of rejection, and not just in schools, but also in my journey of my own career. I've applied to so many seasonal jobs, so many government jobs, as Ricardo has said, and just getting rejection after rejection after rejection. And it's tough. But it's also a real part of the process. And what I have learned in coping with all of these struggles is that you have to keep going. You have to persevere. You have to push on. If this is like really something that connects to your heart, it's something that you really want to do, you have that drive for it. And despite all of that, all those struggles is all behind me, and I've learned so much, and I've become more and more the person that I wanted to be many years ago. And so, yeah, like that has been my experience since.
Oh, thanks so much, Christian. I love that. Ricardo.
Yeah, just kind of want to, first of all, I'm sensing a theme here, kind of like stepping out of your comfort zone and being okay with rejection. And I agree to all that. And I think some of that stuff you can start early on. So the first thing that came to my mind, and I'm going to take this back to like middle school, high school, and that transitionary period. Like I got in a lot of trouble. I was, I had some older cousins who were, gangbangers. And so I wanted to go down that path. And then my parents intervened, and then I went a different path, going towards like a goth, rockero stage. Just doing things that were getting me in trouble. And then in 10th grade, my mom signed me up for, or pushed me to sign up for, what's called the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference. It was something that was founded by the late Sal Castro. Sal Castro was one of the leaders of the walkout movement that occurred in public schools in East LA, and it was all to fight for education rights for Latinos primarily. And this conference was like a weekend long. It was primarily for juniors in high school because it was aimed at getting Latinos interested and hopefully signing up to go to college right after high school. But no one from my high school had applied. And my mom knew Salcasa because she worked for LAUSD. And when she found out that no one put in for my high school, she told me, "You're going to put in. I want you to experience this." And of course, me being somewhat reclusive at that time, did not want to do it. So a friend was supposed to go with me from the high school so that I wouldn't be alone. Well, that person bailed out at the end. And that day that we were supposed to leave, I was telling them, "Oh, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I'm terrified. Like, I'm going to go meet people who are older than me, who I don't know." But she pretty much pushed me to go. And that was a life-changing experience for me. I was 15 years old. And it forced me to step out of my comfort zone, being surrounded by, I don't know, maybe 50 to 70 other high school students that I had never met before. And I think from then on, I started learning how to develop my social skills, right? I was forced, I had no other choice. And so I guess the reason I share that is because I think it's never too early to start with that, because those skills are really going to get you far. Look for opportunities, whether you're in middle school or high school right now, to do things that get you away from your comfort zone, even if it's a day thing. It could be an overnight thing. If there's some kind of weekend opportunity for you to engage with, folks around your age and the public school system, or even outside of that, do that. It's scary, but it's okay to be scared, right? And I think the reason why I always encourage folks to step out of your comfort zone and develop some of these networking skills and social skills is that I really think that that's where we're at now. I think, you could have a 4.0, get the best reference letters, but if you don't have a network, you may not get very far. I think it's really about what your connections are. And that's what's really helped me advance, my career here in the Park Service. And I started that at 15 years old, right, with the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference. So it's never too early. Start now. Yeah, that's kind of the message I want to say, and that know that it's okay to be afraid.
Absolutely. I 110% agree with that. And since you've opened this, this conversation, and, I know that I think, Christian, you had mentioned networking as well. And I think Ricardo, it's come up before earlier in the conversation. I know that you're all at different organizations and educational institutions, and we've already talked about the Mosaics program, but I was wondering if there are any internships that you'd love to highlight for youth out there, for parents or educators, that you really think are great and should be looked into at this moment. So I think, Christian, I'll start with you.
Absolutely. And this is an organization that Ricardo has actually mentioned earlier in the discussion, and that's Environment for the Americas, or EFTA. And in my experience, this was a really wonderful thing. This is my first internship after my volunteer work with the International Bird Rescue Center and the Audubon Sanctuary. And what's really wonderful about EFTA is that they do two great things when it comes to getting students, specifically, Latino, Chicano students to the outdoors. Is part of that, the one half of that is getting the career experience and doing scientific work wherever you are. Because they expand through different states of the United States, but also I think even outside of that. I think they've done some work in Mexico. I think they do some work in Puerto Rico as well. So you get that on-hand career experience, but on the other side of that is the public outreach and that connection that you will have with the Latinx community of where you're working. Was really wonderful. A really quick story for me. One of my favorite things that I've done in my EFTA internship in Oregon was hosting the World Migratory Bird Day event at Yaquina Head. And my favorite part about that was doing this bilingual bird walk for Yaquina Head. And there were these two little Latino kids who were following me, and you could tell that they just did not know what the walk was about or why they were there. You know, they were just at a park. I was like, oh, this is cool. But I got to show them the peregrine falcon that was nesting right next to the parking lot. I got to show them the common murres that were nesting on top of the sea rocks that was, you know, just off the coast. So I got my scope and tripod, and they get to see these birds like really up close, and to see that like wonder and amazement for these animals, these birds, and to an extension, the outdoors is amazing. Like that is a reward in and of itself in my own heart. And there was even a time when I pulled out my bird Sibley guide to show them, you know, oh, the common birds, they look like penguins, but they're actually not penguins. They're different kinds of birds. And I remember one of them, they asked their parents, "Oh, mommy, can we get this book for Christmas, please?" I'm just like, oh God, like to see that inspiration in Latinx children so young is amazing. I feel like I wish I had that for myself, because I grew up not having that experience, not having that knowledge, and seeing that blossom in the Latinx community is just wonderful. So yeah, I definitely recommend EFTA for that.
Amazing, thank you. But now you're in the position of opening that kind of wonderment for children, so that's amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Michelle. Or Ricardo, we can go with you because I think Michelle is having trouble with the connection.
Sure. Can you remind me the question?
Oh yeah. Any internships that you would highly recommend to students out there, to educators, to parents, to look into now?
Yeah. So yeah, to touch on what Christian was saying with the Environment for the Americas, they manage a variety of internship programs. There's Mosaics in Science, which is all encompassing for BIPOC folks. There's Latino Heritage Internship Program, which is specific to Latinos, although I know in the past they've brought on like other BIPOC folks, so it's not strictly. There's also Greening Youth Foundation, which manages the HBCUI, which is Historically Black Colleges Universities Internship Program. They also help place people in positions, you know, across public lands. HAF, the Hispanic Access Foundation, which Michelle works for. In fact, my partner is an example of that. She went through the DFP program, the Directorate Fellows program, and she was able to be hired also non-competitively with the Fish and Wildlife program. So those are three that I can think of, organizations that offer that right off the bat. High school, middle school, I'm not too sure, but one organization that I really like to point out as well, like, you know, whether you're in community college or at a four-year institution, is that I'm aware of. It's nationwide. Is SACNA. It stands for the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. Despite the name, it's all encompassing to BIPOC folks as well. So SACNA was a great part of my college experience, because to know that there's that support system for, you know, folks of color in the sciences is critical. And then additionally, they do give scholarships as well to have you participate in annual meetings. So for instance, when I was in grad school living in Washington State, I was able to fly down to LA to attend the national conference for SACNA. And it was awesome because I was also able to spend time with family, right, while I was at that conference. So SACNA is a great organization to get involved with and familiar with once you're in college.
Great, amazing. Thank you so much for all of those resources. And Michelle, you're back. Are you back? Okay, I think we're having some technical difficulties, but it's okay. So We are about 6 minutes away from the end of this panel. So I just want to know if you have any parting words. Christian, we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have some consejos, some advice, and this is advice that I would probably give to myself 10 years prior. And the first advice that I would give, and I know this sounds very obvious or even cliche, and that is go outside, explore your surroundings. And I know that this can be even a hurdle in itself for many underrepresented communities. Um, but to get that exposure to the outdoors, to the environment, makes so much more of a difference, because not only do you gain that inspiration to work for like a career in the outdoors, but it also explores, for yourself, what is it exactly that you are curious about? What do you want to figure out more about? Is it the birds that that you're really interested in, or is it just like the surrounding landscape of the area that really inspires you? So just getting to the outdoors I think is a wonderful experience, and connecting with Ricardo's backstory. I feel like that is a wonderful thing to just dive into a career in the outdoors. But on top of that, once you're outdoors, you can also connect with the nature around you through your own smartphone. In my case, one thing that I use is the Merlin app from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is really cool for identifying birds that you see. You can take a photo of it. You can even record the call, and it'll do its best to identify that species. Or, if you can't take a photo, you could just say, wow, I saw this bird. It was brown and small, and it was perching on the ground. Oh, it could be a mourning dove, for an example. There's another app that's called iNaturalist, which I also highly recommend if you are curious about the nature and wildlife around you at a local park, at a wildlife refuge, at a national park. You can take a photo of it, and it makes a reference for other experts to see, and they will tell you, oh, this is this or this is that. And it gives you that connection to nature much, much more. And the other advice that I would give is get involved. This is something that I really wish that I have done much earlier in my undergrad. One example that I have here from Cal State Fullerton is the Southern California Ecosystems Research Program, or SERP. And it's a program that connects undergrad students to really these questions about ecology, the problems, and what can we do about just like wildlife and natural resource management. And to have these like early career programs, I feel like is very important. So if you have those, that's just like an amazing thing that you can do. So get outside, get involved. And another thing too that I'm just going to quickly plug in is at Cal Poly Humboldt, we have a program that's called Échale Ganas, which is inviting Latinx students into natural resource management programs. And they just recently had a discussion panel with Latinx people in these professions, which is very similar to what we're doing here now today. So if you're interested in more perspectives from other professionals, I highly, highly recommend watching that discussion. It's very informative. And yeah, I'm just so grateful to be here.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Christian. Ricardo, consejos.
Yeah, I think the thing that I always try to give advice on, just because I feel like this is going to be applied anywhere, whether you're in conservation or not, is I like to talk a lot about or touch on the subject of imposter syndrome, because I think it's very real for BIPOC communities. I think I started feeling that from the very beginning of my college experience, especially once I went to grad school. There's a lot more barriers that communities of color need to go through in order to get to places like where I am or Michelle's at or Christian's at. And through that process, there's oftentimes a self-doubt and wondering, like, why am I here? Am I even smart enough? Am I good enough? And I just want everyone here on this call to know that if you ever feel that you're not the only one, it's very, very real. And I think sometimes the reality of that is it stems from the fact that we come from institutions that probably lack in resources, whether that's monetary or accessibility. And so, by being in these spaces where maybe we're very, very underrepresented, we're starting to break down those barriers for those that follow behind us, right? But know that those moments of self-doubt are, even though they shouldn't be there, they're very real. So just keep pushing forward, fight through that. Always look for a mentor or someone you can connect with. And one good example that I have for that is when I was in grad school, in the geology department, I was the only person of color, and I almost dropped out. I definitely had culture shock and didn't feel like I had a community to fall back on. And so I got involved with student organizations, right? Specifically BIPOC student organizations. And I found professors, right? I found an indigenous professor and I found a Latina professor who I could just connect with on a more emotional level. And it's because of those, right? Those relationships completely outside of my degree focus that I was able to maintain my sanity during grad school and complete it, right? So don't be afraid to also ask for help wherever you're at, especially in places where, you're experiencing, imposter syndrome. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Michelle.
Thanks. Although that was one that I feel something that I mentioned earlier that I feel like is really important, especially if you don't have that support system or even for my goal, like my job is literally to ensure young people of color life after college. There's so many organizations out there that are founded to support you, and it's a matter of finding them. Some may be national, some may be local, and like Ricardo Foundation also manages the MANO project, and it's our department that connects young people of color with these internship experiences that do allow you to get a hiring certificate, I think was mentioned earlier, that could help you get that dream job. So really look for those organizations because they're out there to support you. And also somebody know you who would be more than willing to answer any of the questions that you have if you're thinking about being a wildlife biologist or looks into falcons or something that's really specific. Definitely reach out to people that are here and willing and wanting to support you because I think we all experience in me, but it was nothing worth it comes easy. And I think there's so much truth to that until this day. Because I just think about anything that I really had to work hard for that was worth it. It required a lot of work and it required the time to put in. It required me to step out of my comfort zone. And so that still stays with me today. It just reminded me like, oh, wow, that's what I was thinking 10 years ago. And I still need to remind myself of that. But I would say those are my tips is look out, go and search for the people that will help you if you don't have them in your immediate circle, because I promise you there is an organization out there that wants to help you.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for such a wonderful panel discussion. Thank you for being here. And to all our youth out there, we believe in you, your voice matters, and we need you at the table. So we hope that you leave inspired and have a wonderful week. And please don't forget that we're celebrating Semillitas Outdoors through May 1st, which is this Sunday. And if you go to latinooutdoors.org, you will also find a Semillitas Outdoors resource guide and a wonderful coloring book. So please, please tap into all the resources. Thank you all again so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Christian, Ricardo.